What you are watching is the opening scene of a film released in 1967. It's a naked scene, both literally and figuratively. It started with Faye Dunaway, the lead actress, staring at the mirror, admiring herself. Suddenly, there's a look of dissatisfaction and then a feeling of frustration that was obviously not triggered by beauty. Briefly after, she stood up to get dressed. Through those moments, from the mirror to the walk, the movie teased us with the actress's nakedness. You probably have a different feeling watching this right now. But for people at the time, it was like, whoa, are they gonna? They never did. But this movie would go on to have a game changing effect in Hollywood because of this scene and many others. Simply put, if it had been released a decade before, it wouldn't have gotten a certificate of approval just for that scene, which could have affected its commercial performance. So, what exactly is certificate of approval? Why was it a must have for a film before release? And how did that even become a thing in Hollywood? Before we start with that, let me say this real quick. I've been on this channel for a few months now and I've made 6 videos. But as you can see, I only have 8 subscribers. And while I would love to let the videos do the talking, sometimes you just have to ask for it. So if you're watching this and you kind of have a good feeling about the video so far, please hit the subscribe button. And if you're still loading out, that's cool too. But whenever you get a good feeling, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Now back to it. In 1921, Roscoe Fatty Aboku, a popular silent film actor, was arrested and arraigned for the murder of Virginia Rape in a scandal that rocked Hollywood. He would later be charged formally with manslaughter of the first degree, but eventually acquitted of the charge after 3 trials. However, the deed was already done. Aboku's career never recovered from the scandal, and more relevant here was the reaction it stimulated. The scandal was condemned by religious, civic, and political organizations. In fact, they started calling for censorship. And while that might seem wild to you, you have to understand the context at that time. First, the trial was during the peak of the News Empire, which was known for sensationalization. So the way they covered it kind of caused emotions to flare up, which didn't help the already infamous Hollywood. And that leads us to the second and most important point here. The organizations that were calling for censorship already had it in for Hollywood, and the scandal was just a perfect launchpad to get Hollywood to tone down into lewdness. To understand the reason behind such burning desire, we have to go back a bit earlier to 1896, when an 80-second short film titled The Kiss was released. The Kiss was just about a kiss, yeah. The entire film was a reenactment of the kissing scene from the musical comedy The Widow Jones. So, an 18-second film that was just about a kiss caused a level of uproar that led to police disrupting places where it was being shown. That was how scandalous it was. By the 1920s, Hollywood was already making films that were boldly suggestive. So, it made sense that these organizations would react widely to the Abaku scandal. But despite calls for censorship during the scandal, things didn't get better, at least not at first. In fact, things got worse because of the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, major studios struggled financially because people just weren't comfortable enough to go see a movie. Within 4 years, revenue generated for movie exhibition dropped from 100 million per week to 40 million per week. So to counter this, studios started making incendiary movies. First, they turned to crime. Theaters were flooded with movies that romanticized criminals and portrayed an unprecedented level of violence. But due to public outcry about the effect of crime movies on Americans, especially children, their popularity waned. So they went back to sex.
Jimmy, do you know the devil? No, but I'm going to. Wow. Wait.
This time, the major problem wasn't even the films because there had already been some form of codes that filmmakers were supposed to follow. The major problem was how these films were marketed. Studios would market films with pictures of actresses appearing in poses that weren't seen in the films. They even went as far as marketing with actresses who didn't feature in the film. Yeah, that's as crazy as it sounds. They marketed films using actresses who weren't part of the cast. But in 1934, something happened that changed Hollywood drastically. In 1934, the Production Code Administration was established and all films were required to obtain a certificate of approval before being released. was adopted by Hollywood studios to avoid government censorship, which was becoming inevitable at the time. After the Aboku debacle, calls for censorship kept getting louder and louder, so Hollywood made a strategic decision to silence them by choosing self-regulation. Government censorship would have been very bad for Hollywood, not just because it would affect studios economically, but also because of the creative dilemma it would have caused. Imagine a world where different states had their own censorship codes. A movie that would be acceptable in New York might cause a crisis in Alabama, right? That was the logic behind Hollywood's worry. So, Hollywood chose self-censorship. But to make this move credible to religious and political organizations calling for censorship, they had to do it in a way, in a certain way, make it look real. That was when Ace came in. William Ace was a Presbyterian elder who served as a postmaster general under President Warren Harding. He was a Republican, not just any Republican. He was a former head of the Republican National Committee. Hollywood paid Ace a lot of money to make him president of the NPPDA. Why did they do that? It was a PR strategy. I mean, they really wanted him to help clean things up. But most importantly, they needed a face. They needed someone the organizations calling for censorship could trust. And who better than a religious conservative with ties to the then current administration and knowledge of how to prevent censorship or any wild government reactions? He was literally the perfect guy for it. And for a while, it felt like they were up to something. Ace announced an open door policy, which promised a hearing to any organization that had concerns about a film. And then he advised studios to cut down the salaries of executives and write a clause into actors' contracts stating that they would be dismissed if they are found involved or even accused of any depravity. But it turned out that, like many sanctimonious politicians we know today, Ace wasn't really who he seemed to be. For instance, it was revealed that his office paid secret discretionary payments to people who cooperated with his community and disregarded the objections of others. Also, the open door thingy that started was starting to look more like a trapdoor. And organizations that trusted Ace were starting to have second thoughts. But Ace was being paid a lot of money, an annual salary that is equivalent to $1.88 million in 2024. So, he had to figure it out. What did Ace do? First, he introduced the formula, a set of recommendations that were meant to regulate adapted screenplays. The aim was to prevent certain types of books from being turned into certain types of films. But the formula wasn't a code of standard, it was a recommendation, which meant studios didn't have to live by it, and they did not. So, the formula did not work. Then Ace suggested to studios, hey, why don't you guys form a committee and come up with a set of codes that every film must live by? And they did. They came up with what was known as the don'ts and be carefuls. Don'ts basically meant things that must not appear in films, and be carefuls meant things that could appear in films but must be treated with special care. Later, this list would be codified into a standardized code. But that still didn't work. First, there was a problem with enforcing the code. The offices tasked with reviewing films and scripts were getting many more films and scripts that they could handle, to the extent that Warner Bros. Head of production had to write a letter telling one of the offices to pick up the pace. Second, some studios were straight up ignoring the code, something that became more frequent during the Great Depression. By 1934, that goes to the point where nationwide censorship was inevitable. So Ace met with the studios again and told them the only way to escape censorship was to ensure that everyone followed the code, or else there would be government censorship and studios would be the most affected. That worked. It led to the birth of the Production Code Administration, which required films to obtain a certificate of approval before they were released. The Production Code Administration was super effective. It was the first time Hollywood's self-censorship really had a hold on studios and filmmakers. And that was because of the man William Ace selected to head the administration, Joseph Breen. You see, Joseph Breen was very strict and unapologetic. He couldn't care less that he spent years working on a script or whatever. If it violates the production codes, that's game. The first time studios got a memo was when the movie Tarzan and his mates got rejected, mainly because of this scene. They didn't get a certificate of approval until multiple scenes were removed. Even films that were released before the administration got established had to be remade to get screened during this era. But things got tricky during the build-up to the Second World War. Filmmakers wanted to make films about the growing brutality of the Nazis, but the administration wouldn't allow them to because the code prohibited it. So every attempt kept getting turned down until the summer of 1939, after the FBI busted a Nazi spy ring and Warner Studios made a film based on articles written by the agents who led the investigation. Making this film was difficult because during that time, pro-Nazi support was prevalent in the United States, so there was a fear of violence. The studio was heavily guarded during filming, and German actors who were part of the cast couldn't use their real names for fear of attack against their family members still living in Germany. But getting the administration to approve it was even more difficult. To Joseph Green, it didn't matter that times were changing and something was looming, or that the Nazi Germany had just violated America's sovereignty. The codes were the codes. Also, Joseph Green was a casual anti-Semite, so that didn't help. Eventually, the film got approved, but Warner had to remove any mention of Jewish people or anything that would incriminate the Nazi and their agenda at then.
For a price, Ugarte. For a price.
Things were like that for a while. The administration would censor films that violated the code, and filmmakers would try to creatively bypass the code without altering the ultimate intention of their films. But things took a wild turn in December 1941, when the US officially joined the Second World War. After Pearl Harbor, creating World War II films wasn't just a creative or ideological fulfillment anymore. It was a necessity. In 1942, the government created the Office of War Information, which was meant to spread propaganda and win citizens' support for the war. To achieve this aim, the Office of War Information believed the best way to effectively spread propaganda was through the medium of entertainment. Basically, Hollywood. You see, Hollywood played an important role during World War II. I did a separate video on that, by the way, and I will tag it at the end of this video. So, how it worked was that the propaganda arm of the government would review scripts and ensure they were passing the right message. Although they couldn't force filmmakers to make changes to script they didn't like. No filmmakers wanted a piece of the government, especially during such a time. And while that was happening, the production code administration was still doing its own thing. So filmmakers would try to ensure whatever they were working on would pass the right message politically. But more importantly, filmmakers had to make sure it wouldn't violate the production code administration. It was hard to do both, and many films struggled to navigate those restrictions without losing the essence of what they were trying to create. One film that was able to not just navigate the restrictions successfully, but even use them as creative fuel to transform its meaning was Casablanca. Casablanca perfectly reflects the tension of this period in Hollywood. Politically, it's a masterful propaganda film because on the surface, it seemed like just a remarkable film about love and sacrifice. But for the people at the time, it seemed about isolation, and the way the film ended with the cynical protagonist eventually contributed to the war effort by making an ultimate sacrifice really spoke to them. Rick Blaine felt like an allegory for America during that period. On the moral end, it was masterful because of the way it navigated the production codes by implying things that could have been shown because they would violate the code, and by changing the ending from the original intention of Rick ending up with Ilsa, which would have violated the institution of marriage, to Rick sacrificing his feelings and safety so that they could escape with Ilsa. Eventually, it was due to necessity to follow the codes that the filmmakers were able to create an iconic ending that would later cement the film as an all-timer.
Play La Marseillaise. Play it.
But not many films could do that. Not many films could navigate the production codes as creatively as Casablanca did. And also, the idea of having to tone down the realism of one's film because of some strict, archaic censorship codes was starting to piss off some filmmakers. Really. And luckily, they got a break. After the war, more filmmakers were making films that boldly violated the production codes, believing they could attain commercial success without getting the administration's approval. This belief was inspired by earlier films that successfully violated the codes, like The Outlaw. The centerpiece of The Outlaw was literally just slashing Jane Russell's boobs at every opportunity they got. And it kind of worked. The film never got the certificate of approval, nor was it critically acclaimed. But due to masterful PR execution, the film became a commercial success. So, subsequent films like Johnny Belinda and Pinky would do the same thing, successfully. But that wasn't still a smart thing to do, because the production code administration and external watchdogs still had the influence to make or mar a film. You needed the ultimate endorsement to give your film a chance of succeeding. So, many filmmakers still wanted to make sure whatever they did aligned with the codes. However, there was a major shift in the 1950s. Foreign films started gaining traction, thanks to a consequential lawsuit between the federal government and Paramount Pictures Incorporated, which ruled that film studios were not allowed to own theaters. This eliminated the control that major studios held on film distribution, which meant theaters could screen movies based on public interest and independent decision-making process, without factoring in the influence of studios. This was huge because foreign films were not bound by Hollywood's self-censorship codes. so they could export films that most American studios couldn't make. And that became a problem for those studios because foreign films really capitalized on this advantage. For instance, two Swedish films, One Summer of Happiness and Summer with Monica, had close-up nudity, lovemaking, and adultery. They were also pretty successful in the United States, despite hysteria about how sexually loose the films were. Hollywood studios took success of these foreign films as a cue. While they couldn't release such kind of films because they were bound by the codes, they could do something else. They could buy a film distribution company that specializes in distributing foreign films. Then they could import foreign films and distribute them using this new subsidiary that wouldn't violate their codes. And that's what they did. As they were circumventing censorship by importing foreign films to other subsidiaries, they were also doing something else. They were testing the influence of the censorship codes and censorship itself. They tested the influence of the codes by making films that explicitly violated the codes, but not in a way that was excessive. They would make films that explored themes they're not supposed to touch on, and those films would get rejected by the production code administration. But then, the administration would tell them that the film could be approved if they made slight changes, and they would make those changes and get the films approved. So, they were strategically pushing the boundaries of the codes. Later, the administration went from make slight changes to, okay, we just write the codes to accommodate some of these ideas.
This way, Daphne.
Simultaneously, some studios also tested the influence of the administration itself by making films that flat out violated the production codes without caring for approval, just to see how successful the film could be. Some of these films were successful beyond imagination, and some weren't. But the double attack the administration was facing on those two fronts was too powerful to withstand. So in 1964, the boundary was successfully pushed again. The administration went from, okay, we'll write the codes to accommodate some of these ideas, to giving approval to the porn broker, despite featuring two scenes with fully exposed boobs.
I work out.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yes. He has a very firm body. Have you? Oh, I think that's very nice.
Well, you never know. You know, once you have it.
You never know when it's going to come in handy.
I was going to say, why give it up until you have to?
I couldn't agree with you more.
After years of internal debate and erratic application, the production code administration started working on a rating system in 1966. That same year, they soft launched the idea by tagging Warner Bros. Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf with a label because it couldn't get approved based on the scope of the codes they had then. The film severely violated the codes, so they created an advisory label called Suggested for Mature Audiences in order to get it approved. That was one of the earliest uses of the rating system in Hollywood. 2 years later, Hollywood abandoned the production code for a full-blown rating system that evolved into this current form. Despite this evolution, the aim has always been the same: to classify films based on their degree of violence, profanity, substance, nudity, and sex. Today, censorship is still a thing in Hollywood, but in the form of a sophisticated quid pro quo, which is characterized by cooperation between the US military and film studios. Scripts for movies like Iron Man had to be altered to show the US military in a good light, and in exchange, the producer got access to military resources. But, I mean, if you look at how far Hollywood has come, that's maybe something that they are willing to live with. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to comment and subscribe. I'll catch you on the next one.